between the paper and its drivers has erupted into violence at two suburban distribution centers. Correspondent Mike Taibbi joins us live now from the center of New Rochelle. Mike.
Yeah, Jim, I'll set the scene right here. Over my right shoulder, a couple of New Rochelle police cruisers and a couple of others have been going up and down the street. Behind me, about a dozen pickets from the Newspaper and Mail Deliverers Union. These are drivers, union drivers who are on the picket line right now. And beyond them, the warehouse of the West Fair newspaper distributors, where replacement drivers in a couple of hours will attempt to start getting out the first edition, the early edition of the New York Times. Now, these same elements were in place last night when there were 8 arrests up here in New Rochelle and some disruption of attempts by the replacement drivers to deliver the New York Times to local newsstands and to home delivery operators. It is a situation that will likely get worse. It has many of the trappings of the standard labor dispute. Men on picket lines claiming in this case they've been thrown out and locked out. Security guards ringing the building of the company that had employed them. Violence already. Several trucks have had their windshields smashed and their tires slashed. 16 arrests. And anger, plenty of it. But this is not a standard labor dispute. The issues that have not been resolved, that have sent some 210 newspaper deliverers union drivers to the picket lines, are subtle and complex and vitally important to New York's newspaper business and newspaper readers. Put simply, the New York Times needs to cut costs and has asked its 7 unions, including the century-old Deliverers Union, for help. The Times offered generous buyouts and job guarantees in exchange for overtime concessions and cost-saving changes in work rules. The drivers refused.
Are there issues in it that they don't like? Sure. Are there issues in it we don't like? Sure. Is that what collective bargaining is about? Sure. So it's a good contract.
And the drivers rejected a subsequent offer this week from New Jersey businessman Arthur Imperatore, who had bought 2 wholesale distributors, this one in New Rochelle that services Westchester and Fairfield counties, and another in Farmingdale that serves Long Island. Imperatore then took advantage of an arbitrator's ruling and replaced the Deliverers Union drivers. The lockout followed, and then the first incidents of violence. Why didn't the union drivers accept the Times offer? They say their income would have been halved at least, because half their income has come from overtime.
We had routes with overtime, which they were wiping it out. They were wiping it out. Thousands and thousands of dollars they were wiping out right off the bat.
Well, number one, I'm a floor man. I work inside 5 days a week. Now they're telling me I have to be a chauffeur, I have to be healthy, I have to have a certain type of license. I don't have all these things. So they tell me, well, we'll reconsider your application.
Yeah. So you could be out.
Yeah.
Well, while it's the New York Times that's making a stand right now, this stalemate, if it continues, could eventually affect all 2,900 union drivers, and they deliver newspapers, all of New York's major dailies, the Post, the News, New York Newsday, the Wall Street Journal, and the Times, throughout the tri-state region. This is Mike Taibbi reporting live from New Rochelle. Back to you, Jim, in the studio.
Thanks, Mike. Be thankful you aren't driving alone.
This driver tried to stop a truck himself and was arrested. But about 100,000 copies of the paper of record were not delivered in Westchester, Connecticut, and Long Island after drivers at 2 Times wholesalers were locked out after rejecting the latest contract.
There's got to be a point where they can't treat you like dirt, and that's exactly how they treat us, like dirt.
Last night, 20 drivers were arrested after rocks and bottles were thrown at their Teamsters replacements. One driver was injured when a rock thrown on the LIE smashed his windshield.
We are not out to break these unions.
Times publisher Arthur Sulzberger says the union's leadership has ratified the contract, even though the drivers have not.
Do you expect the labor unrest to spread to other departments and possibly shut the paper down?
No, I believe, and I think last night was a good case in point, that our production was not interrupted. The other unions at the New York Times have contracts which are in force. It is my hope and belief that they will be honored.
While these drivers are out of a job, more than their financial security is at stake, but also the future of the newspaper business itself, and how we, as readers, will receive the copies of our favorite newspapers every morning. In Farmingdale, Long Island, I'm Eric Shawn, Fox 5 News.
The owner of the drivers who distribute the paper. Ed Miller is out live tonight to see if the papers are getting to the stands, but first, Drew Scott reports on a day already marred by violence.
Blood has already been spilled in the bitter and violent lockout. 240 newspaper and mail deliverers union members voted overwhelmingly this week to reject a new contract with Arthur Imperatore's Newspaper Delivery Incorporated, which distributes the New York Times and Wall Street Journal from this location on Long Island and to Westchester County from New Rochelle. Management immediately fired the union members and hired non-union replacement drivers. Arnold Newberger has been delivering papers for 39 years, but is now out on the picket line.
I think it's outrageous because these guys, first of all, they're all professional drivers. They're good men, and I've worked with their fathers, and I have the sons working for me now. That's how long I've been a foreman.
You locked out?
Absolutely.
At issue is built-in overtime for the drivers' union. Management wants to eliminate overtime, cutting their annual average income from $80,000 a year to $40,000. Tempers have run so high, someone tossed a rock at a non-union replacement driver early today on the Long Island Expressway. The driver lost control and suffered facial cuts and had to be treated at a local hospital. In another incident, Suffolk County police units were called in after a pipe bomb was discovered underneath a delivery truck and it had to be defused. More than 20 arrests have been made by police so far. There was a pipe bomb found on the premises.
Too bad. He should have got cancer. The driver and the pipe bomb, if somebody put a pipe bomb here, which I don't believe was one of us, it should have went off.
The Times and Journal, reeling from a lack of distribution in over 3 counties, sought and won this afternoon a temporary injunction against the strikers.
Court order represents direction to the union that they will not interfere with the delivery of the newspaper.
So far, the men are refusing to remove their pickets, and Teamster trucks loaded with copies of the Times are refusing to cross the picket lines. So while the New York Times may be considered the newspaper with all the news fit to print, unless this bitter strike is ended quickly, you may not be able to read all about it. From Long Island, Drew Scott, Channel 11, News at 10.
Well, that standoff is still going on this hour, and we're going to go live right now to Ed Miller, who's at a major newspaper distribution point in New Rochelle. Ed, is the Times going to be on the newsstand tomorrow?
Marvin, if you live in the northern suburbs, you'll probably have a very hard time finding the New York Times. Only 2 delivery trucks were able to get in here tonight, and those were manned with replacement drivers. All of the other trucks were turned back, for despite a very cold and hard rain out here, tempers remain hot.
Run me out! Come on!
Angry out-of-work drivers sitting in the roadway tonight, taunting New York Times delivery trucks to run them over. Other union members strongly advising their fellow drivers to turn their big rigs around. Some actually threatening their fellow drivers. New Rochelle police had to stop the illegal blockade before it escalated into more serious trouble.
What I'm telling you is if they wish to drive these trucks through, okay, you cannot block the public street.
A court order which forces drivers to deliver papers to suburban distribution points means nothing to many of these drivers who feel the real villain here is the management of the Times.
The court order doesn't mean that the driver has to come through. A court order says that if he's afraid for his life, you know, afraid that something might happen to him. But that court order is not going to pay my bills or feed my 2 kids.
These are the guys who start the trouble. These are the guys who want to go and knock some heads so that they can say that the New York Times union members are the bad hoods of New York City. We're honest, law-abiding citizens.
Now, this location was the scene of some violence early this morning. Protesting drivers are promising me that there will be no new violence against fellow drivers. But as we told you earlier, 2 of the trucks that did come in were manned by replacement drivers. So how that all pieces itself further into the night is still a question. Now, as far as the other papers, the News, the Post, the Wall Street Journal, and Racing Forms, to avoid, most of those are avoiding this distribution center altogether and going directly to the stands. So that's the situation here up in Westchester County in New Rochelle at this distribution point. Once again, very quickly, most of the trucks were turned back. Only 2 did get in, and the 2 that did get in were manned by replacement drivers. Reporting live, I'm Ed Miller. Back to you.
Okay.